Okay, do you have some? Yeah, okay. I think if we start to take our seats, just as it's 3:30 and I don't want to eat away into our valuable time of gaining some intellectual knowledge of everybody in the room. Nice, thank you. Okay, so welcome to what we hope will be an interactive and interesting session following on from today's adaptive management science session, which gave a really good background to a lot of the things that we want to discuss today in our cumulative risk management of marine high north ecosystems. So my name's Terry Suster. I'm based at UIT working within the Barents Risk Program. And this event is actually funded through CLEAN, which has a Barents Sea case study sitting within the CLEAN program, and is being organized between UIT and colleagues at Aquaplan Niva. So the CLEAN research program actually addresses combined effects and risks associated with multiple stresses in the high north ecosystems. And this side event is really just the start of what we hope will be a continued process of communication between all of us. And hopefully, if you're interested in hear lots of interesting discussion going on today, please make contact with us, and you can do that through the Arctic Frontiers website or on the CLEAN program. But I'm really grateful to have a really interesting set of panel members here with us today, which I will introduce as we go through the session. And also a thank you to Visual Knowledge, a colleague of mine based down in Tasmania, who did us a great infographic illustrating here where we decided to focus on 3 pressures in this event, but we know there are many more, and we know that many of you know there are many more. But here we're focusing on noise from shipping, fisheries, and climate change. And because we only have a really short time scale for the Arctic Frontiers side event, which is 90 minutes long, we'd really like to spend the time focusing on knowledge gaps, priorities, and challenges for cumulative risk management. So I think that gives a nice, just brief overview of what we hope to achieve. And I'm going to introduce the first person who's actually going to join us online from Slovenia. And she's someone I met a few years back. I was doing some research off the Irish coast on the Celtic Explorer, and we were looking at non-invasive monitoring methods for marine protected areas. And I met Robertina, who was on board, not as a scientist, but as an artist. And she is going to talk a bit more about that, but her art looks at underwater soundscapes. And I will leave the digital platform over to you, Robertina. We don't hear you.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think now it's working. So thank you, first of all, Terry, that you invited me. I'm really glad to share my experience of the underwater sound presence of animals, but sadly also what is more drastically changing in the last years is the human representation. So I would just share some of my I asked before already, I would like to share some of my screen, but I don't have the sharing possibility.
Yep, it should be now.
Wait, I will just, yes, no, it's working, perfect. So to be short, but I think like what Terry wanted me to also go directly into the topic is the sounds, you know, when I was like I work as an artist researcher so many years with different marine species and so on. I look a lot into different ecological challenges and changes which are happening these days. And there's lots of topics, as Terry said also in the beginning, but to focus only on the sound and noise, I would say this is the research vessel which Terry also mentioned, where we met. It was in the Celtic Explorer in Irish waters. Recently, I just managed to experience the pristine and really lovely, amazing soundscapes of Galapagos, where I have to say that, you know, when we are inside of this kind of beauty of sounds, and then on the other hand, when we incur this, what I'm showing here, so many boats is always different how we kind of interpret and hear the sound. So I will speak today, and mostly you will hear one of my compositions, which is called Aquatocene. It was presented on many different places, also brought into discussion through the scientific point of view, through the different articles and so on. But to not just speak, I will let you know to listen for the next 3 minutes to some soundscapes which I recorded in Bergen, and I put them into composition. Do you hear good?
Yes, we hear. Thank you. Robertina, we don't hear now. We did initially when you first started.
Okay. I will try one more time to share the screen just to make sure that something went wrong or something, but it shouldn't. Okay. Sorry for this.
Yes, that's good.
Are we good?
Yes, yes.
Sorry. So this was just as a, I will stop sharing and just say that this what we heard now and what I wanted to represent and what Terry was also inviting me to show is just like what is the happening in the oceans and seas. Many times people explore them more through vacations or leisure time, where we all have this idea of beauty, of pristine serenity or silence, or all this what is actually not happening, because mostly what it is like our very noisy presence, which is like interfering with, but I think we will hear more from other presenters today. But what we do mostly is just like interfere, and the anthropogenic sonic presence is something which I think it's very important to be addressed in different levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Robertina. That's a real insight, I'm sure, for many. I know for me, just to hear that underwater noise, and sometimes we talk a lot about it in cumulative risks, but actually just getting an insight to listening. And if I know we're in interest of time, but if people want to follow up with you further, they can obviously make contact with you. And feel free to stay online and join us. But just moving on now, I'm going to move on to The next two presentations, with the first from Ellen Haney, so chair of ICES Strategic Initiative on Human Dimension and an economist at NOAA Fisheries. Alan's research includes the spatial analysis of fisheries under climate change, biological and market conditions, and with the implementation of catch shares and other management changes. So I'm super grateful to have you with us, Alan. I know Alan is part of the scientific advisory panel with the Barents Risk Program, and I know you have many connections to many in the room, so I'll hand the floor over to you, Alan.
Thanks very much, Terry. Yeah, great to see you all, and it's really great to be here. And I've actually recently moved to Copenhagen. I'm the General Secretary of ICES, so my general stressor world has changed a lot as I went from a NOAA economist for 20 years to now I'm the head of the Secretariat in ICES. So I'm going to kind of talk about my intro talk here is really framing the ICES context to think about multiple stressors, and then happy to answer questions about kind of the comparative process. Okay, sorry. Okay, I can't see. Okay, as you probably know, ICES is an intergovernmental organization, so 20 member countries from North America across Europe, and then we work in a lot of different projects and scientific coalitions from North America up to the Arctic and down to the Mediterranean. So we have these three pillars, so data, advice, and science. And so you may know all of these, but we collect data and work hard to standardize and make the data as rigorously available as possible for all sorts of different processes for all of our member countries and all of the organizations and the public. And then we have a science network of hundreds of groups, hundreds of centers, and about 6,000 scientists. And then we use this to make management advice to contribute to it. And kind of key message is that this is your network too, and please check out our website and look at all of these different groups, as there are elements of this, and we're able quickly to put support to bring scientists together across disciplines, countries, areas, stressors, and address problems as they emerge. And so there's a long history of this. We were formed in 1902 and initially very focused specifically on fisheries, but over time there's been more and more inclusion of emergent problems as they've happened, including noise as one of our more recent working group processes. And as I mentioned, there's a traditional focus on fisheries advice of how many fish can we catch is really still a lot of what we do on the advice side of the organization, but we now work in biodiversity, in different types of marine habitat, bycatch reduction, a lot of different areas. And then the science support for that is this dynamic process where new groups are created, and they're groups that have been around for a long time, and people get together and then try to understand, okay, what are the questions that need to be answered? And then we work with advice requesters, countries, international organizations who are trying to answer specific questions and then bring together experts to support that. But one of the key issues there is, okay, how do we have these conversations, anticipate what the questions are going to be asked so the science is as rigorous and well-formed as possible to answer the emerging questions. And we put a lot of this information together in ecosystem overviews, aquaculture overviews, and fishery overviews, which are these succinct places where you can take a whole bunch of ecosystem information and look at it, and policymakers can use it to support different types of questions that they're working on. And behind these are integrated ecosystem assessments, which this is one of my answers to the question of this session. Okay, how do we do this? You bring people together across disciplines repeatedly over time and think about the way that the stressors interact across disciplines. And we have IEA groups across all of the ecoregions, and then those lead or contribute to the ecosystem overviews. And WGIBAR is a Barents Sea focused group that some of you are involved in. And this you can look on the website and into the report and see all of these different ways in which the different types of stressors are evaluated over time. More recently, there's a group focused on the Central Arctic. Again, a number of people involved in this group are here. So this is only a couple of years, and as it became clear that fisheries are being considered in the Central Arctic Ocean, scientists were able to come together and quickly bring people from different disciplines, bring the state of the knowledge to the questions of, okay, what does it mean if we start to fish here, and are really doing an amazing job, and over the next few years will contribute to the experimental fishing and the development of more activity in the Central Arctic. Another kind of key point is it's not all about solving everything at once. So this is this F-eco approach. So F is just fishing mortality, is how many fish can we catch, and in the Irish Sea, this has been a several-year process where they've considered lots of ecosystem information in the process, but it's been a very challenging, involved process. So this is a key message: is make sure that you're realistic about the scope of what you consider, because this was just a relatively small introduction of the process, but it's really doing this rigorously is quite an undertaking. We have these strategic initiatives, so one on early career scientists, but one on human dimensions, and one in climate change, where we recognize that these are cross-cutting issues, so we have to think about these across different areas. This is one of the ways that we link our groups together to think about multiple stressors and to recognize that the system and the relationship among all disciplines and different parts of our system, different groups, is going to continue to evolve. Just to point to, we have this aquaculture overview, which is set up as to look at aquaculture impacts on the environment and vice versa, what the impacts are to aquaculture from different sources of pollution, other stressors. And just to then quickly wrap up and try to stay more or less under my time limit here. The idea that I'll be happy to answer all sorts of questions during the session, but the framing this is what we're doing in ICES, is setting up the environment. How do we think about these multiple stressors, recognizing that people are a crucial part of the system, both as the stressors, of course, and all sorts of different ways that we impact the ecosystem, and as the users of the ecosystem. And the more we can couple the people who use the resources with the scientists who are trying to study them, the more effectively we're going to be able to get to the right questions and answer them as well as we can. And with that, I'll stop. Thanks.
Thanks, Alan. And my bullying of 5 minutes worked. And just to say that Alan will be joining the panel later for the discussion, so there will be time for everybody to ask him lots of questions. But Jennifer, I can welcome to you to give us the second talk on addressing what knowledge on multiple stresses would be most relevant and why. Jennifer Bailey is a professor of political science at the Department of Sociology and Political Science at NTNU. And Jennifer specializes in environmental and comparative politics, especially relating to marine management. Thank you, Jennifer.
Okay, thank you, and I guess the slide will come up now. I was asked to talk about what issues on multiple stressors was important for me and why, and I got sort of two versions of that question, one to me personally, but the other as a manager. I'm not a manager, but this brings up a point I think that's really important. I am a professor of political science. I deal in politics, and that's the one P word that's missing from this conference, the political side of these things. It can't be condensed down to policy, and it can't be condensed down to management. But I understand why a lot of people would like to avoid that word, and yet we will not accomplish any of these goals unless we begin to take politics seriously. So let me sort of fill in a little bit. Take the next slide, please.
Oh, you've got the clicker there on
top.
top.
I've got the clicker. It's me. I have the power.
That's okay, it's
there we go. Okay, so if I'm going to be talking about, so what do I need to know about multiple stressors and so forth? But first of all, as a person that has a foot firmly planted outside of the fisheries and aquaculture and marine realm and sort of into the more general politics realm, first thing that's important for me is to know precisely what we're talking about when we're talking about multiple stressors. I've been working with a lot of people in this field for a while, so I have to think I know. This can be also dangerous if you think you know. So if I'm going to be then talking to people, bringing other political sciences involved, or talking to people who are outside the realm of fishery science or the realm of marine management, I need to be able to understand very easily what we're talking about and then be able to tell them what we're talking about. Relation to management. At the end of the day, the manager has to make real decisions about things, right? So it's not enough to know that these things are theoretical possibilities or that they're going to make a difference at some point in the future. For us, I think it's really important to know what's going to happen and when. And I realize, of course, that this is almost impossible. But it's going to be really hard to shift people unless you can come up with some really concrete discussions about what difference these things make on key ecosystem services, and when and where. For example, not just broad oceanic processes, but how does it actually impact a particular community or a particular nation state? That really is sort of the basis for political choice. Politics, of course, being the authoritative allocation of values within a society, right? Not market distribution, but the authoritative allocation of values in society. That means, of course, that all choices have actual consequences for the people who are out there deriving their livelihood from the ecosystem, and also others. So if you're going to be making decisions, those are going to have real-life consequences, and we need to know exactly what those are. That, of course, is a tall order. I understand that. So I've already said what it already means. I'm not in sync with my slides. Yeah.
Press the button, so you just maybe
okay.
one. Yeah.
Okay, so then, okay. Okay, so another thing I want to know about then are cause and effect relationships. So we have all these multiple stressors, and I think that this is just another way of saying some of the same stuff already, which is to say, it's not enough for me to know that there are changes happening in the ecosystem. I need to know what the relationship between those changes are and, for example, specific effects on particular ecosystem services, right? And I know that systems mean that you can't really trace cause and effect relationships very, very easily. They're very complicated. There may be no linear relationship at all. And yet, if we're going to take policy decisions about stressors, then we need to know something about what impact those kinds of decisions are actually going to have on the key values that people are actually worried about in society. Also, how the question of sort of knowing about the system, what indicators are going to be useful and why. And of course, how certain are we of those kinds of statements about causality or about how likely things are to happen or what the degree of change is going to be. Okay, so in politics, it's all about prioritizing. There are a lot of things going on in the world, so you have to decide not just what's happening with multi-stressors, but what's happening more broadly. And it comes down to, what am I going to put money into? So if you tell me that there's something going on in the ocean, I need to know how important is that relative to all the other things that I actually am legally or politically obligated to pay attention to. Managers have goals set for them by laws. They have certain obligations they have to react to. And you're not going to change those laws unless, of course, you deal with the political dimension of these things. So managers implement, but you have to decide what they're going to implement, okay? Politics, particularly in political societies, is all about trying to figure out what the preference schedules of a zillion different people are and try to coordinate among them. That's what prioritizing means. Nobody has the same set of preferences about what should be done, how much money ought to be put into it, and what the time frame ought to be. So politics is about deciding or coming up with some sort of collective decision about just what those things are. And that brings us back to the point that you can't just talk about sort of using an absolute figure, how important is this effect, but how important is it in relation to other things going on that I, as a decision maker, have to pay attention to? Okay, yeah, so yes, not just enough to talk about what the different sources or the different stressors are, but I need to know where they come from and what I can do about them. And okay, need to know timeline for how quickly I have to act. Okay. I don't have any idea where I'm on time, but okay,
thank you, Jennifer. Nice to have the inner workings of a politician's mind, which I'm sure is difficult for most of us. And so now we're gonna move on to two talks which will happen remotely. Slightly different aspect. We're gonna talk about the current challenges when researching effects of cumulative pressures on marine ecosystems, which has been discussed a lot already today in the adaptive management. And the first one will be from David Lusseau, I hope I pronounced that right, David, from DTU Orbit in Denmark. David is a sustainability scientist interested in estimating the conservation and sustainability impacts of human disturbances on habitats. So over to you, David.
Thanks a lot, and thanks a lot for making it possible for me to present remotely. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you today, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing more through the events as we go. So as you said, I'm going to talk a little bit about research and management challenges when it comes to cumulative pressures on marine ecosystems, and particularly the difficulties we're all facing at the moment to try to understand what this cumulative really means and how we might be able to move forward with finding ways to manage it. Move forward. Perfect. So first, if we want to look at the current status of biodiversity conservation threats, we can have a look at the red list provided to us by IUCN. And here what I've listed for you is the relative contribution of different conservation threats to threats of marine species in the whole world. And what's quite nice with the IUCN threat list is that we can also understand from the work that's done by the Species Survival Commission whether those threats are unlikely to return, are in the past, they're ongoing, or whether they are likely to be future threats that the species will face. And what I really wanted to focus on is how much biological resource use, so overexploitation of resources in one way or another, so the old fisheries management, is something that we seem to be getting a handle on, but the threats that are emerging are around pollutions, such as noise pollution as well, and climate change, of course. The difficulty we have is that if we look at how confident we are whether these threats are causing a decline in the species, we can see that in most instances, for all these different conservation threats, we don't know. So we think we know there are threats, their severity is largely unknown. And that goes as well for those threats for which we have a really good handle. We've got half a century of really good research that has taken place. So we don't know much about individual threats, but then these individual threats act together as well to create a complex hazard landscape. So if we take an example like a simple situation where we might have some shipping and some fishing taking place in one location, these might create disturbances, habitat modification, and unintended lethal injuries to a particular species. And that species might rely on some other species to go through its population dynamics, if you prefer. But actually what will happen is that these hazards are going to create risk for different components of the life stages of these particular species in that case. And that means that when it comes to trying to predict what the accumulation of those pressures is going to mean for conservation threats and conservation status, it becomes really complicated. And then we might try to actually engage with some mitigation on a particular threat, so decreasing one risk, but actually leading to an increase in novel threats, which might affect the population in other ways. So this is some work we just did actually with a very simple model where we're just trying to understand how bycatch mitigation by using pingers might influence bycatch rate depending on the prevalence of pingers in a gillnet fishery in our case, and we're dealing with porpoises. And what we found is that using agent-based models is that if we increase pinger prevalence, actually bycatch rate at low pinger prevalence might increase, so might have an unintended consequence actually going against the mitigation intervention we're trying to engage in. I mean, of course, these conservation status questions, so these biodiversity objectives we have, also fit in the wider societal question, which Jennifer just really highlighted really well just before in the question about political powers and pressures, which have to do with energy security, food security, and of course, trying to maintain a thriving blue economy with its largest sector being tourism, for example. How do we balance those things? So the cumulative pressures are not only just a question around biodiversity objectives, but also about their contribution to other societal global goals. So how do we do it? It's complicated. One approach that seems to be useful is engaging more with mechanistic model to try to get to an appraisal of what cumulative risks might be. And there, essentially, it's particularly kind of moving a little bit from a research perspective away from really data-heavy, data-driven approaches to describe well particular situation to mechanistic functional models, which might be less informed, which is good because we don't know much about what's going on in many cases, but for which we might be able to make better predictions. And that's me. Thanks a lot for listening. If you are interested in these questions, follow our projects and get in touch about any of those. We need your help as well. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And at first we couldn't see you, we just saw your slides, so it's nice to have a face to the presentation. And I know you will be staying with us to have a bit of a discussion through the panel later. But great talk, and thanks very much. So I'm just moving on to the last of the presentations today, which is also presenting on current challenges when researching cumulative effects, pressures on marine ecosystems. And sadly, Cecilia couldn't join us, so she's doing remotely as well. And Cecilia Hansen is an ecosystem modeler. But over the last few years, she's been involved in assessing the vulnerability of ecosystems components. And actually, you'll be pleased to hear, Cecilia, that you were mentioned today in the earlier sessions and your work on the vulnerability assessment by various colleagues. So I'll hand the floor over to you.
Thank you so much. And thanks for making it possible for me to attend remotely, although I would have loved to be there with you. Let's see if I can manage to share my screen properly. Can you see my slide?
Not yet.
No, okay. Still not?
No, but something is happening. Hang on.
Yeah?
Yes, we see your slide, the first screen.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so as Terry said, I'm an ecosystem modeler. I work in the Ecosystem Processes Group in Bergen, IMR. And today I'll give you a very short and quick introduction in the work that we've done on assessing the risk of anthropogenic impact on ecosystem components in Norwegian marine waters in the particularly vulnerable and valuable areas that we call SVOs. So, sorry, I struggle with my slides.
It's okay.
Let's see.
Yep.
Okay. Yes. For each of a set of 19 suggested particularly vulnerable and valuable areas, we've done an ODEM assessment. And I would not recommend doing 19 of these in parallel because that was a huge amount of work. But it was at the same time, it was extremely interesting to get the overview on which sectors that are active within each area, which pressures these sectors are connected to, and which ecosystem components they possibly would have an impact on. So at the start, we did an assessment of just mapping which sectors are active in Norwegian waters. And I hope that we found most of them at least. And then the second one was to link each of these with the pressures that they have. On the figure here, which is a Sankey or a spaghetti diagram, as we like to call them, you can see on the left that there is a list of sectors. And each of these sectors are coupled to a set of pressures in the middle. So fisheries, for instance, are coupled to extracting of biomass, bycatch, but also to the more common ones like contamination, littering, and underwater noise. And what we could see during our assessment was that, in particularly these three, contamination both from oil and from other components and underwater noise, were those that were linked to a large number of sectors and came out as pressures that had an impact or where there was a risk of impact in all areas. Our risk of negative anthropogenic impact was assessed as the vulnerability times the overlap, where the overlap counts both as frequency and also the area. So how often is the pressure there? And how big an area is there an overlap between the pressure and your ecosystem components? On the right-hand side, you can see that close to the name of the ecosystem component, there is a color. And that indicates the vulnerability of the ecosystem component to climate change. Because implementing climate change directly into the spaghetti diagram, using the same approach as for the other sectors and pressures, is challenging because climate change is everywhere and continuously. So it would have a huge overlap with our ecosystem components. So that's why we chose to do it this way. If we move to my last slide, you can see on the map to the right the 19 suggested SVOs in Norwegian waters, and they cover 60% of our area. What struck us was that there is a big shift between the risk of cumulative impact between the coastal areas and the more offshore area that you can see on the figure to the left. There are also a difference between the sectors that have the highest risk of cumulative impact, where we see that the 4 largest ones are fisheries, oil and gas, transport, marine shipping, and tourism. And tourism is coming up as one of the newer sectors. I think I'll end there, Terry, because I think I used my 5 minutes. And thank you.
That's great, and it gives a huge flavor to challenges, which we're going to focus on talking in the panel of these cumulative and multi-sector approach. So thank you very much for giving us a good flavor there. And that's all from the presentations. I hope everyone took on board what was in these presentations here, but we're actually going to move on to panel discussions. And Cecilia and David, who are online, are going to remain there to contribute to the panel discussion. But we're also going to invite Raul Primisterio to sit on stage in place of David being here in person. And I also want to invite Sofia Anisita, who's here and has a background in acoustics and is doing a postdoc at NTNU. And I'm also hopefully got my 2 in the room I haven't said hi to yet, but we should have Tur Vaskin and Frank Back. Yeah, great. So we'll invite you guys all to come and sit on the stage with us. To engage a little bit in audience participation as well. And we really want to have this discussion now on priorities, knowledge gaps, and challenges for cumulative risk management. So if you guys come up to the stage, and then while we're doing that, if team at the back, maybe you can set the screen for me with the sliders. So if everybody who will have their phones with them, we're going to move this conversation along with engagement with you guys in the audience. If you can just answer questions that come up on the screen. So that's right at the end. So if you could try to get to the first question on the... So you should be able to just scroll back through the questions to the first option. So if, while you've got this Slido out, while we're just dealing with getting to the start, you can enter the code to join the Slido, which is, if everybody's sort of there, slido.com. Yep, and I'll just read the code, 8627285, which will come up on the screen as well, hopefully in a moment. So that's 8627285. Yeah, it's coming. They're just having a few technical issues, Liz. But just go slido.com, and then I can read you the code again. So just on your normal internet Safari, just type slido.com, so slido.com. Just give them a few moments, and then if not, we can move on the old-fashioned way. Yes, sure. No problem. It's 8627285. The plan was for it to be on screen, but we're just getting there.
Can you photo you while we're waiting?
Do I? The joys of technology, so one of the challenges of communication, hey? Can I help at the back, or? Yeah. Maybe, Raul, maybe we start with just a general conversation while I just see if I can. Yep.
I think we can. Hello? Yes? Yeah, thanks a lot again for the talks. The presentations were very interesting. We get a sense of the challenges, even though we focus only primarily in this case on noise, on fisheries, and then the climate change that modifies our ecosystems. We get a sense of the complexity of addressing management and cumulative risk management. And I thought the talks, the presentations really gave a sense, a flavor of that complexity. We ended up with a very complex type of spaghetti diagram that Cecilia Hansen presented, and those are overwhelming. So when seeing the complexity of cumulative risk, we often feel a bit powerless with regard to decisions, management decisions to tackle that. But on David's presentation, we could see that by that's probably painful work, so looking into processes and mechanisms, we often can identify solutions. The problem is that the number of stresses and the number of pressures associated with each human activity are so many that we are not making sufficient progress on the specific progress, let's say, processes and mechanisms that we can rely on when making decisions on or advice on management options. So this is a topic that follows from today's adaptive management session. This disconnect between the rapid pace of change in the environment and the difficulty for science to keep up with advice on the one hand, and then for management and policy to act upon that advice or that complexity. So I think that's what we're going to debate today, what we're going to discuss together. And as we progress with our sharing of questions, I don't know if there are comments at this stage. We can wait for the questions. Terry? Yes? Yeah, so...
But if you want, maybe I can jump in?
Please, David. But
and
please,
so you
David.
should see the first question on the there where you best associate your knowledge and expertise. So this was really just to get us using the Slido app and just to have a bit of engagement, which we already saw in the previous adaptive management session. So here we are already seeing the difference in the spread of people here within the room. We have 70% science, 20% management and industry. That's great. So you can click on the same arrow that we did now to move to the next question. Here, are you involved some aspects of cumulative risk? So we just were interested to see in who in the room is actually working in cumulative risks. Sorry, you have to do some neck crick, but I can say it's 68% are saying that they're involved in some aspect of cumulative risks, and then no, but they're interested is 34%. And so we can move to the next one. So the first few questions we'll just go quickly, just to see what's in the room. So we can press the arrow to the next question. And here, so beyond fisheries, noise, and climate change, because this is what we've been focusing today's event on, but we know there are other stresses on marine high north ecosystems. Can you just select the ones that you think are the main stresses, the main other stresses? So we have oil and gas, tourism, litter, military. So that just shows that actually already in the room people are aware of these other stresses, but even though we've chosen to focus on noise, fisheries, and climate here. Okay, we can move on to the next one. Thank you. So cumulative risk management is challenging when dealing with many sectors and many pressures. Marine high north ecosystems have many levels microbial communities in the sediment, seafloor marine invertebrates, non-harvestable fish species, marine birds, and mammals, which all contribute to biodiversity and ecosystem services. Should risk management focus on species, trophic levels, or whole ecosystems? So there's a big 92% here are saying whole ecosystems. So that's just, again, a quick one that we'll move on to. But the next question coming up here, we really want to open up for discussion. And what we'd like with these questions is we have the panel that will engage in discussing what comes out from the audience, but we also would like anyone who would like to ask a question or discuss or give any comment, just raise your hand, and we have a microphone here at the front we can give you. So just moving on to the next question, thank you. We all agree that cumulative impacts are complex, and cumulative risk management of marine ecosystems is challenging. A quick, cautious measure could be to reduce activities across all sectors when there is overlap to mitigate cumulative pressures. So some examples of this could be lower fisheries catch limits than those set by fisheries as a standalone sector and pressure, or set an upper limit to the number of ships within an area regardless of activity when sectors overlap. So the question here is, what other rapid mitigation measures can we put into action right now? And you see there's a list of options. I'll just read them out as you're going through it. Reduce the number of vessels in the area. Limit temporal, i.e. time season overlap between multiple sectors. Limit spatial overlap of multiple sectors, or marine protected areas, i.e. no shipping, no fishing. So everyone should have had a bit of time to go through there, and if I just read it out for everyone also sitting on the stage who's got a crick in their neck. So there's a 52% here are saying we should limit temporal, so time and season overlap between multiple sectors. 44% are saying marine protected areas, so no shipping and fishing at all. 32% are saying limit spatial overlap of multiple sectors. And I don't know if you have the option there just to see the last. No, don't worry. You can. I was just trying to see the last, which you have to scroll on the screen, but don't worry if it's too complicated. But it was just to look at the reduced number of fishing vessels in the area. So here, just to the panel now, if you maybe want to pick up, either of you. I'm also looking here at our stakeholders, because it's interesting what people are saying. It would be interested to hear your points of views coming from fisheries sector. But here people are saying we should be limiting time overlaps between multiple sectors in the area, marine protected areas, and spatial overlap where we have these multiple sectors operating in the same area. Did you want to maybe pick up on any? Just take the microphone.
We already have areas where you're not allowed to fish, and Fiskebåt had an agreement with Greenpeace, and there was also other organizations, Russian, involved, and there were in the new areas we were not supposed to use control to fish. So there is a lot of things has been done, and you also have huge areas in Svalbard where you're not allowed to catch anything but shrimps. You have 15 to 20 nautical miles from western Spitsbergen, you're not allowed to fish.
Is that to do with these overlap of sectors, or what's the reason for those no fishing?
There's no fishing, but it's because of the new fishing areas is because you want to protect some of the seabirds from bottom trawling, and effects on the ecosystems on the bottom.
Okay.
The other, that's older. I don't know why there's the national park and the extension to from 4 nautical miles to 12 nautical miles of the territorial zone of Svalbard.
Okay, so I see Sophia has a comment, but just before we move on here, I'm thinking Barents Sea, and there's an area in the Barents Sea that we know is very popular for fishing because there's a lot of fish there. But then there are also ships moving through because they're going to Svalbard, tourist ships or commercial ships. So we also know there's shipping there. And then we have this climate change aspect. So here we're looking at potential cumulative risks going on in one area. So here, I'm just wondering thoughts, how do we maybe manage that in the Barents Sea?
There are not many ships in the northern the Barents Sea, in northern Barents Sea. There are actually not much activities. If you see the marine traffic, you see the picture where most of the traffic is in the coastal Norway and North Sea, and in Svalbard there is the traffic to the Isfjord, but not much. The shrimp trawlers, they are allowed to fish in deeper waters than 100 meters in Svalbard, and there 20 years ago there were a lot of shrimp trawlers there, but now there's just a few. So there's been a reduction of fishing activities in that area. So the picture is not the same, but the tourism has been developing well in Svalbard. So it's a lot more of a tourist ship.
Thank you. Sure, and then we can pass the mic to Sophia for a comment, and then, yeah.
It's interesting that you talk about management here, but when you talk about management, Jennifer Bailey, she was the one raising the most interesting question: what can you do about it? I mean, the scientific question posed by this research program has been what I call to set the diagnosis, to understand the cumulative impacts. And if I go to the hospital and I end up in endless searches for X-rays and laboratories and blood sampling and so forth, I mean, that doesn't cure anything. That is the basis on which you can start to try to assess what shall be done. What is the treatment? And we have one approach for doing this, which is called ecosystem-based ocean management. And my understanding of this is very simple. First, you need to have an understanding of the problem. You need an assessment, a cumulative impact assessment, as this research program deals with. And then next, with Jennifer Bailey nicely described, you have to understand the policy measures that are possible to apply to reduce the negative pressures. And then you can have a political discussion. What is most important? How do you prioritize? Which of them will you do? And in Norway, we have two systems for doing this. We have the ocean management plans in the ocean, and we have the water management plan when we come closer to the coast. These are the two operational systems that we have.
Thank you. Yes, valid points. Sophia, did you want to follow on from that, or?
Well, I was going to go back to the original question on the marine protected areas and cumulative impacts, because when it comes to noise, we have long-range propagation. Noise will not stay in a fixed area. We talked about earlier this morning long-term monitoring programs. What happens in those marine protected areas when you have long-range propagation of noise? What is happening there? And also considering noise is actually the only type of pollution that when you actually turn it off, it's off. There's no residue, it's gone. And so thinking about the extent of these protected areas and what is the impact in reducing the number of vessels or actually having no vessels at all, it would be really interesting to study more and to understand what is happening in considering all the other stressors that are going on that do leave residue.
Yes, some very interesting points there about marine protected areas and boundaries and things obviously being able to pass outside marine protected areas. And thank you to the tech team, but they made me aware that David is sitting online with his hand up, very eager to tell us something. So over to you, David. What's your comment?
I'm not sure about eagerness, but I definitely had a little something to say. These are all very good points, and you know, from a on paper, is indeed a very efficient and logical approach to the issue. I think in practice, what we're finding out is it's a little bit hard to actually go through this kind of cumulative risk appraisal to the very end, to the actual defining actions. And it's because in many cases, we are going to find some trade-offs where there isn't a right or wrong answer. Or what is it that we should prioritize? Or we're going to ask what industry should be prioritized. and different people will have different opinion and will be 50-50 split. So in practice, we can indeed kind of, try to, and a way to say it is kind of cut the cat in many places, in many parts, and try to understand the parts of a cat. And so it's an old saying, but we still don't understand how the cat is working by doing that. And that is, I think, one of the advantages of trying to have a broader perspective. So I was quite pleased to see, that people think that ecosystem is an important scale at which we should be working with. But I think we need to actually think a little bit further than that. Even is that at the moment we are considering, people and the activities that sustain them as apart from this ecosystem, and we're trying to manage people so that for some ecosystem targets of some form. But we're coming to trade-offs that if we want to actually achieve some of the ambitions we have on ecosystems, we're going to have to severely impact and deteriorate some well-being component for people. There's a reason why people fish. It's not out of, it's maybe out of pleasure, but it's, that's not the primary reason. There's a reason why there's a bunch of sheep out there. It helps in our economic prosperity. And there's a reason why there's tourism out there as well. So being able to kind of ask question, which is, what is the place of people in this management procedure and approaches? And how do we therefore manage multiple objectives, not just about ecosystems, but actually also the societal objectives we need to maintain, is quite key.
Yes, thank you, David. You're right. There is definitely always a bigger picture: economy, social, science, management, stakeholder. Yeah, everybody with different agendas. I just want to check. I know. Did you want to have a quick last statement there with Jennifer? Did you have something? Sorry.
Yeah, real quickly. I agree that first we have to map out and understand what's going on, but I want to emphasize that doesn't just apply to marine ecosystems. It also applies to social systems. And people, it turns out, and their social systems are equally complex to the ecosystems in the ocean. I have a feeling sometimes that people sit and they tell me, oh, you're going to not understand all these systems concept about planktonic communities. There's so many variables involved. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, that's what we do in political science, social science. It's hard to predict people. So I would say that be serious about social science, and I would look to praise ICES, because ICES, I'm in a working group in ICES, and they're making a big emphasis on this. But that means also National Fisheries Institute, some of the primary components of input for ICES, needs to fund social science in a really serious way. And finally, the decision systems in Norway are not just the two mentioned, but also the elections for starting it. The national parliament is an important part of the decision-making process, which we tend to forget. But as an American, I can tell you that we can't always take reasonableness of politics for granted. I guess I won't say any more than that. Thank you.
Frank, go ahead. Did you have something you wanted to
add? Yeah, just a few comments. First, it's interesting to see that we have 70% scientists in the audience, but for once you didn't say we can't decide because we don't know enough yet. We were 50-50 on that, so that's interesting. I think we need to be I agree on most of what's said. I think we need to divide this question. We need to see the Arctic and divide it into geography. This is the most active part of the Arctic, but it's not that active anyway. So the example with the Irish Sea, and it's in a way not comparable with what we have outside the dock in Tromsø. We need to see it we divide it in species, in quotas, which type of vessels we use, which fishery. There are borders, there are people living depending on the activity in different ways. So I think we in a way we managed to look into a lot of the moments or the initiatives we need to take, but we don't need we don't know the consequence of the cumulative yet, and in a way we need to know that answer before we can create a model for managing with everything. But at the same time, we haven't been that bad through the last 30, 40 years. It's because good management also is about less cost, high effect, predictability for people, for business, for actors, the possibility to predict where we would be in 5 years and 10 years with the activity, and in a way we can say that we have managed to do this the last decades, and then the changing are coming more rapidly, but at the same time we do put some effort in creating knowledge about how the environment is. So yeah, it's complex. Scientists always said we don't know enough, but we take some steps and some stairs, and we change and adjust the models. So I think we're going somewhere, and we're not going down, in my opinion.
It's encouraging to hear, and I guess starting is having these conversations where we have you guys here from the fisheries sitting here discussing with us, and we have managements and we have scientists in the room, and so hopefully that continues into the future. There's more to come that will pick up on a lot of these discussions, so I'm going to hold you there, but I just want to give opportunity to anybody sitting in the audience who might want to follow up with a question. Yeah, we have time for one quick comment. You have one as well, yeah.
A while ago, I talked about 2 types of assessment. We need assessment of the state of the ecosystem and the pressures upon it, as has been at the heart of the presentations here. And we need assessment of what can be done about it. I've done research on the Norwegian management plans. And it's if you talk about the balance between these 2 types of assessments, what I found in the first phase of those was that there were hardly any rational underpinning of the government decisions that looked at the measures, that analyzed the measures. Partly for joke, I called it traditional managerial knowledge, what was used, because it relied completely on what people in the ministries believed would work. But there were no formal assessment of the measures. And that is what I really miss here in the discussion. This is a complex issue because it involves all types of political scientists, economists, lawyers, and so forth, who can look at how do we manage people, how can we influence people's behavior, and then that change in behavior must be related to changes in ecosystem components, which is the realm of the natural scientists. But it's a complete imbalance between these 2 types of assessments. And here you mostly focus on the natural scientific part of it.
Thank you. Liz, I'm going to come to you in a minute, just because I imagine it will come up again. But if we can just move on to the next question, thank you, at the back. I just want you to have a look at this one. So with climate change, fisheries, and noise in mind, so here we're talking about noise from shipping, so we're not talking about seismics and other noises. What is the most pressing knowledge gap on cumulative risks? So if you could have a go at answering that next question. So what is the most pressing knowledge gaps on cumulative risks? So we have indirect effects, interactions between stresses, which ecosystem components are most affected, and which mitigation measures are most successful. So hopefully after today's adaptive management sessions, we all know what all of those things mean. I was gearing up to explain, but it's been talked about a lot today, and hopefully everybody's happy with those. But here we're looking at the most pressing knowledge gaps on cumulative risks, and it's 63% are currently saying interactions between stresses. 44% are saying which mitigation measures are most successful. And we've got 24% indirect effects. So based on what's coming out there, does anybody in the panel maybe want to kick us off on what they think to that answer, or what they think are the most pressing knowledge gaps on cumulative risks? Who's feeling feisty? Frank?
I'm not feeling wise enough now. But I do agree with the interactions, the unpredictability with the climate change. I think lies in that answer, and I think that's common agreement. Both if you ask a politician, businessman, or scientists.
Yes,
I'm happy with that.
Cecilia mentioned the fact that we haven't included climate change in the vulnerability, the cumulative impacts for that very reason, is that it spans across all, and we don't know enough about really how it... Bertrand, did you want to add something to the...
I just have a question. Is noise, is that a problem in the north? I mean, there's not much activities when you look at the whole picture compared to North Sea and other areas. And when herring fishery, the whale stocks, for instance, different kinds of whales, they are attracted to the boats because they get some easy meals, fast food.
It's an interesting one to bring up, and we have many people actually sitting in the audience
so we
who
have
know
a
a
lot
bit
of
about it.
scientists here.
And Sophia also maybe can comment on that, where the noise in the Barents Sea is something we need to worry about.
So as we heard earlier, the ship traffic, what we're getting more and more in the Barents Sea and in the Arctic, and at the same time we're losing ice. The loss of ice means louder seas. The whales are attracted, yes, to fishing boats. That involves a certain exposure to noise. Chronic exposure to noise will lead to physiological damage. We don't know what those long-term effects are going to be. They do trade-offs. They do their own cost-benefit analysis of what is going to be the energy that they get from that interaction. But the reality is we don't know for the 80 years that a whale lives, what does that mean? And what does that mean for their young? For many species, when there is noise while they are finding their mate, and often a lot of them will make sounds and depend on sounds to find their mates and to interact with their young. If those sounds are covered by fishing boats or whatever boats, so just general boat noise, and there is no ice, maybe the young can't find their mothers again, and then there will be a calf that will be left alone.
So I guess this is a big challenge, is actually we don't know a lot about noise. And so then this comes back to, should we try to mitigate the amount of ships that are in an area because we don't know a lot? So maybe we should be more cautious because there is an effect there, but we don't know enough to say what the effect will be. So that's great to touch on that. And I see a hand up in the audience, maybe Trude or Claudia. Claudia's there, thank you. Just on a comment, but bear in mind we're talking about cumulative impacts here. So yes, noise is one of them, but obviously we're talking about in the context of others as well. So go ahead, yeah, Melissa.
Thanks. I was just going to add to that what you said there, Sophia. Yeah, so our understanding is that underwater noise and underwater sound is different in the Arctic, and we talk about the Arctic as a special case when it comes to that because of the cold water and the salinity profiles. It means that underwater sound travels longer distances at shallower depths than in other oceans. So what that can mean is that a smaller number of ships or smaller number of sources of noise can have a disproportionately large effect. And there has been some work that's been done in the Arctic Council for the last 6 years just to try and understand levels of noise, changes in underwater noise from shipping, different types of ships, including fishing vessels, and that's a relatively large source of noise in the Barents Sea. And I mean, yeah, when we look at the overlap of ship traffic and important areas for noise-sensitive species. The Barents Sea definitely comes up as one of the hotspots across the Arctic, and together the Chukchi Sea and Bering Strait, and also Baffin Bay between Canada and Greenland. So there's a few sort of hotspots that I think we need to look out for. And just to come back to your reminder to us, yeah, I mean, it is very difficult. I mean, climate change is working on a particular scale, and there are things that we can influence at different scales. You know, we need to have global action on climate. We can work at the regional scale on some of these other potential stresses as well. And to say that it seems from some of the talks that we've seen that, yeah, noise is one, it's a difficult one. There's a lot that we don't know, but it's an interesting analogue around the rest of the world as well, because I think there's been systematic review of 100 species in other parts of the world, and 100 of those have shown negative impacts from underwater noise from different sources, so not all from shipping, some from wind construction, others from seismic surveys. So it is an interesting policy question of when is the science enough to do something, keeping in mind that doing something will have trade-offs as well.
Thank you. Yeah, some great points there. I'm going to move on just because we're pressed a little bit for time and there's some more discussions we would like to have. So if we could have the next question, please. And here we're saying, how can we address the challenges of cumulative risks in our management of marine high north ecosystems when our research and management is sectorial? Scientists are separated into research groups: benthic, processes, climate, fisheries, pelagic, and management. Management are separated into fisheries, shipping, oil and gas. So here we're asking, how can integration in science and management be promoted to effectively address cumulative risks? And the options are communication between sectors, knowledge co-production, so knowledge generation involving scientists, management, and stakeholders, integrated management, which we heard about, integrated governance. Put them all then, Liz, if that's what you feel. Yeah, thank you. So we have 14% on integrated management, 16% integrated governance, so less there, and then more are going for the communication between sectors. So it will be interesting maybe in the discussion, is that more from what we understand we need, or is that what we know we need? So maybe if I can open up, Alan. So we have a really good high percentage of people saying here that we need communication between sectors and less on the integrated governance and management. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, hard question. And so I was thinking a lot about just some of the different comments of, studying management measures. I certainly, as a social scientist, believe in that. And I think, Jennifer nicely talked about, gave context for sort of thinking about what's relevant based on what's feasible and how people are going to use information. And I think that, we can't know everything here. There's a trade-off. We're going to remain ignorant to one degree or another across a range of things we would like to understand well. So I was involved in a project in the Bering Sea Integrated Ecosystem Research Program, and then the Nansen Legacy Project also have these really large programs across a whole bunch of different areas trying to understand how climate is and is likely to impact the ecosystem. And so you're looking in some cases at these areas, and this is how is the Arctic different? It's like we know less about what's happening in lots of aspects because we haven't been as present there and active. And so I think that those types of projects are really useful to kind of give us something in places where we sometimes know almost nothing about different relationships. And then in the management side, as we do that, then we have to make all these hard trade-offs of how much time to spend in different areas. And that's where I think the knowledge co-production process of making sure you're working with knowledgeable resource users, great scientists across all disciplines, and then connecting to policymakers in a way that you're connecting that circle so that you see the people who live in the environment and ask the right scientific questions that frame the policy questions in a way that we can make the right make well-informed decisions and use our scientific resources well to focus on those questions.
Thank you, Alan. Is anyone in the audience that wants to comment or ask any questions related to this question? Or if not, anyone on the panel wanted to make any further comments on integration in science and management, and how can we promote it effectively to address cumulative risks?
Just a short comment, because it's going back to something that was discussed during the session on adaptive management. And what we have seen there is that there are some governance, let's say, challenges with regard to integrated management, so promoting integrated management. And what we've seen is that, for example, in European Union, there are attempts at developing governance so as to make it more participatory, more integrated. And that means that we don't have that yet. So one of the things that we hear, from stakeholders, managers, policymakers, scientists, there's a need of arenas for that dialogue, for that discussion. And the arenas should be provided by governance. And the problem is that that's not happening yet. So there is an issue related to governance that is beyond what scientists can do. Scientists usually organize projects in such a way as to favor dialogue, co-production, but that's in a limited scale, on a very limited scale of the 4 years of a project. But to have that longer perspective, we need help from governance again. So that was one point. And the other topic was about where can the debate relating to actions and, let's say, implications of management decisions that Gunnar was inviting to think about. So how can we do adaptive management? Essentially making decisions and then seeing what the implications are for the ecosystem, and then adjust the type of action we do. In single sector, that is viable, but for the moment, because of the lack of that integrated management, the multiple sector management does not open for that type of approach. And that is, again, partly governance, partly the reality of management that challenges it, and partly the knowledge gap, of course. Yep.
I'm wondering, Jennifer, did you have anything to add from the comment on the governance providing a spot for this kind of platform for communication and between management scientists, stakeholders?
I'll briefly say that first starting with government and the way policy sectors have evolved over time, the current terminology is siloed knowledge. We have to think in terms of both sort of institutions or structures of all kinds that have grown up around various sectors over the years. So you have institutional lock-in, for example. So a lot of us recognize that you need to break down those silos, and sometimes the other sources of governance, as opposed to government, come into the picture and help break down those silos and facilitate communication across them. But you still need to break down the silos inside the government sector itself. Yeah.
Thanks, Dana. Is anybody in the room? I know we had some. Sorry, Claudia. You.
Hi. I'm studying environmental law, and in environmental law we were talking about the precautionary principle, that in case of scientific uncertainty we should not act, but I'm not hearing about it here or during the entire day. Does this mean that is it not being applied at all? Is it being ignored? Or when talking about the ecosystem-based approach, because I'm not hearing about it, and when you're talking about this, it keeps bringing into my head, and I'm not hearing about it. It's weird.
In case of scientific uncertainty, we should just not act, as in if we don't know what's going to happen, we should just not make noise in that area. Is that what you mean? Yeah, okay, so I guess I'll hand it over. Does anyone want to pick up on that? Because we talked about it briefly in terms of precautionary mitigation measures that maybe we should put in place if we don't know how these cumulative impacts are reacting in the same place. Jennifer, did you?
I was just going to say, I think it's broadly recognized as an important principle in international management, international law. But I think there's been a tendency to make it, use it more in terms of introducing new things than trying to manage things that are already there. So it's very difficult to grandfather it in, so to speak.
Thank you. And I see Cecilia has her hand up, and you're on the screen here with us, Cecilia. Do you want to have a comment?
Yes, wanted to come back to the possibilities of sharing the knowledge and to for discussing with the different parts of management, because through our work with the ecosystem cumulative assessment risk analysis, that was the project that was audited and paid for by the Ministry of Environment, but by Faglig Forum, where we had a lot of communication and discussions back and forth because most of the sectors that are operating in Norwegian marine areas are represented there, and they gave us the possibility of discussing sector by sector all our work, but also to present and discuss the findings that we had together with all of the sectors that are represented. So there are possibilities, and the discussions that we had with them were really fruitful and gave us a lot more knowledge through the work that we were doing.
That's great to hear. So, yeah, positive outcome there, but these discussions you were having between the research and the sectors that are using the areas that you're doing the management plans. Thanks, Cecilia. Yeah, Frank, did you want to comment?
Well, yeah, because we need to choose between some principles, and we need to think management and sustainability. We need to measure cost against effectivity, and the last, and which I think I've been discussing most, both as a politician and now as a bureaucrat, is the principle: could we do something because we don't know enough, or could we do this with what we know today? And I think that's very often where the discussion ends, and some politicians decide something, and we are going further. And then we need to look back. How did we cope? And as I started with, I think in a way we're not doing that bad. Anyway.
And Alan, you had a comment.
Yeah, I was just going to say, for me, in seeing policymakers talk about climate change, especially, but also like bycatch mitigation measures, like it's repeated exposure is really important. And so, I think we have to recognize kind of where we are. Like, we can imagine we could create some perfect governance system, but here we are, and we're going to go to some different place. And I think a crucial thing is just setting up the structure, whatever we can do, whatever's doable, where we put people to talk about the issues in a repeated way, because then you'll really understand what the priorities are of the whole spectrum of people involved. Thanks.
Yeah, okay, Claudia.
Hi, so you touched some upon sound and like mitigating ships from vesseling in certain areas, but what about mitigating sound from ships in itself? So basically my question would be, what technologies or implementations are being considered or worked with in order to mitigate and take out the noise pollution, basically?
Yeah, nice question, and I'm sure there's a few, but yeah, Frank, the microphone is there.
Well, we have some small, simple examples, and not on behalf of the whales or the seals, but of the fishermen themselves, because we have some small fishing vessels which are electrified, because it's easier to work the day on the vessel with no noise than if you have to have the engine going all over. So as long as it's the human ear, it's possible to do something.
Yeah, it's nice to hear the perspective from a human rather than the marine. And yeah, you see the silent whale watching vessels out there. So there is measures in place. We just like them to move a little faster. And I don't know if so sorry, you're pointing. No, yeah, I was aware there was a question here coming from the audience.
Well, it was actually my question as well. How quickly are we moving on with the electrification of the fishing fleet? Because that could be part of it's part of the green shift and the climate challenges that we have. So it's more, maybe you cannot answer it, but I think it's very interesting to learn more about that.
Do you want to pass I think Tor maybe had a comment to the...
Yes, I had to disappoint you because there is no electric fishing vessels so far. It's only what we call on hybrid. If it was a car, you need a diesel engine to get to the fishing grounds, and then you can fish for a few hours with electricity, because you need so big package of batteries. And bigger vessels, they also have some batteries, but that's usually for getting more stable electricity on board. There is no possibility to have poor seiners or trawlers with electricity. Sorry.
Yes, no, it's
yeah. I've been trying a lot of different things, but liquefied gas is probably the best thing right now, but it's very expensive now. So they have dual fuel engines, and they go on diesel now because it's more expensive with gas.
Thank you, Tor. And just before Sophia, David is joining us again with his hand up. So if you wanted to add a quick comment, just as quick as you can, David, because we're close to the end.
Yeah, I think it was a conclusion on this point, actually, which highlighted really well. We can think of a lot of technical solutions for mitigation, but at the end of the day, all of them will have a cost. And when it comes to cumulative pressures appraisal, there will always be a cost. And so the question becomes more, what cost are we happy to live with, rather than can we wave a magic wand and make it all disappear? Because that will never happen. And unfortunately, I think that's a position where what we're trying to find at the moment still in many cases. And we know that these kind of solutions are not there.
I like that comment. Thank you, David. Sophia, do you want to have a last concluding remark? Yeah.
I don't know, is this working? Yeah? Yeah. Just a little bit, it touches on that, the kind of the values for society overall, and bringing the issue of noise is not something that is very straightforward, in the sense that we heard before, we like maps, reports with maps. Sound doesn't work with pictures. It's sound. So for people, it's very hard to relate to something that you don't see. And so it's something that is quite a challenge, and to inform and create this value and have people value natural or wild sounds and understand what is happening in terms of human-made noise, when it's in itself something that we don't see. And there's ways we can see it in time and in space, but not both, and that is very complicated.
Yeah, really good point. And I'm hoping that Robertina gave us a little insight into some ways that we can appreciate what's actually going on in terms of noise in the water. And I'm really sorry, but the time went super fast, and I'm conscious that people may have places they have to be. But before everyone runs out the door, what I do want to point out is that you can make contact with all these people, and all their information is on the Arctic Frontiers website. And hopefully you will continue these discussions with us along the way as we deal with these challenges and knowledge gaps, and we can work together to find the answers. But I know it's going to be a long journey. It is 5 o'clock, and there's the poster session kicking off at 5:30, and I don't think we have to be pushed out of the room. So if people wanted to hang around and ask questions to anyone in the room, you can feel free, I think, to do that. But for now, I'm going to say thank you very much to everyone's contacts. And just to point out, with the Slido there, we have all those answers, and obviously it's going to feed into a lot the CLEAN program that Raoul is leading, and 13 institutions are involved in that in Norway. And a lot of what we've done here will continue through that CLEAN program. And if you're interested in being involved, then reach out to Raoul or myself, and we can pair you up with the relevant people. But thank you very much, and thank you to everyone on the stage as well. And thank you online. And thank you so much to the tech team. That was brilliant.